Hi, friends. My name is Edie Summers, and I run this page, Chronic Fatigue Support. And I had promised you that I was going to talk about how to cope with being lonely and also how to cope with being misunderstood. I think both of those scenarios are really common in people and for people that have chronic conditions, whether it's chronic fatigue or another chronic condition. Loneliness is a byproduct often of being isolated from having a chronic condition. So obviously, if you're not feeling well, whether you're chronically fatigued or maybe you have chronic pain or some other symptoms that might make you feel isolated or need to rest more or even be isolated in your home. These are all reasons that people can become isolated in addition to being misunderstood. The more you're misunderstood, the more common it is to be more isolated. It can be harder for people to understand where you're coming from. They may not understand what symptoms you're dealing with or what your situation is. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about both of those circumstances. And, some of it is just offering support and empathy for understanding what it's like to go through both of those circumstances, but also maybe I'll share some of the things that I've done either to cope with being lonely or being isolated and being misunderstood, and or just anything else that I can think of that might potentially help you. So again, my name is Edie Summers, and I was diagnosed with CFS officially when I was 35, but I developed symptoms when I was 22. I had a ski accident, I had surgery, I had arthroscopic surgery, and something drastically shifted in my body after that surgery. And then I was in physical therapy for almost a year, trying to get my scar tissue down in my knee from the surgery. I was taking a bunch of ibuprofen every day, like 6 to 8 every day. I was taking painkillers after surgery. And to this day, I still don't know exactly what changed or what caused symptoms for me of chronic fatigue in my body after that, all of those things that happened, but something shifted. Now, there's a lot that I've done to help manage those symptoms, and I've had periods where I've done really well. When I take really good care of myself, practice a lot of self-care and really prioritize my health and well-being, my symptoms are a lot better and a lot more reduced. However, my story actually goes kind of in two parts, because there was the first time I developed chronic fatigue, and then I got into the natural foods industry because of that, because I was looking for answers. And there's a whole story I can share around how I got into the natural foods industry. It's because I was looking for answers, and I actually, in physical therapy, I wasn't doing very well on the prescription painkillers. I wasn't doing very well on the ibuprofen, and there's a lot more I can share about that story and kind of what led me into the path of looking for answers in the natural foods industry. But how I ended up in the natural foods industry started helping me improve my energy, because I started learning about natural health and natural wellness. And there was a lot of things that I started integrating from what I learned. And I share a lot of that in my book. I wrote a book called The Memory of Health, and I detail all of that in my book. And I've done a lot of videos talking about a lot of those topics, and I can do more. But today I'm going to focus primarily on how to cope with being lonely or misunderstood, because those are some of the biggest factors that come up. So again, I went through this 2 times in a major way. The first time I started doing a lot better when I started learning about a lot of natural tactics that can help improve energy. At least for me, they did. And again, I talk about all that in my book extensively. And then in my 30s, I developed really bad symptoms again, after a really stressful marriage, after an abusive marriage. And it's a very long story, and I go into that story in great detail in my book as well. My book is full of stories, research, and tips and resources that all have to do with either chronic fatigue, chronic illness. And I do talk about the experience of being lonely in the book too, and being misunderstood. But I would say the second round I had with developing the really, really major symptoms of chronic fatigue, that's when I really started experiencing also in addition to the symptoms that had kind of resurfaced in a really intense way. And there are a lot of reasons why they did resurface. Again, a lot of it has to do with having gone through a lot of trauma and abuse, severe stress from my marriage. That period of time in my 30s is when I also started to experience a lot of loneliness and isolation because I was getting a divorce. I was sick and exhausted, so I was naturally isolated. When I got married, I had moved from one state, Utah, to another state, Oregon. So in good faith, and at the time, I left my job that I had in Utah. I left my friends. I left family members in Utah to go be with my husband in Oregon. And then when my marriage fell apart due to abuse and trauma, and I started developing really intense chronic fatigue symptoms again, I was in a different state, essentially by myself. I had one friend there that I saw occasionally. I definitely started to feel that sense of isolation, which then turned into, I would say, very, very deep loneliness, in addition to not feeling well and being sick. So in addition to that, I was bedbound, essentially, more or less for about 6 months. So it was very intense. It was very hard. One of the things I've learned that can really combat loneliness, and I know this can be difficult to implement when you're feeling like you're bedbound and or homebound more, or isolated because you're sick and or have chronic symptoms, or because you're being misunderstood. But one of the things that can really help is connection. And I know that can be really difficult to get more of when you have really unusual circumstances. This is something I'm still dealing with to this day in terms of building up those connections, especially because I had moved to a different state completely. So all my friends were in Utah. I didn't have a support network in Oregon when I really needed one, especially after an extremely stressful and abusive marriage and then developing all these symptoms again. But nonetheless, that is one of the things that can really help. So it's something to this day that I still am working on, and encourage you to do too, is to try to find, even if it's just that one person or a few people that maybe can understand your situation more, or they don't even need to know all the details of your situation, but they can maybe be someone who can be a source of support and love for you and friendship, whether that's a friend or family member. It does help to do what they call make bids. So making a bid is like reaching out to someone and trying to forge those connections. Now, some of you might be lucky enough to have friends or family or partners that are supporting you. My ex-husband was not supportive in any capacity, even before I got really sick again. Like, I, of course, had shared with him my struggles with chronic fatigue when we met. Now, I was doing pretty well when we met because I had found a lot of tactics that were working for me, and I had kind of recalibrated my nervous system. Again, we don't really know what causes chronic fatigue syndrome. And chronic fatigue itself is a symptom that can be connected with many different types of health issues, and even beyond that, like burnout. There are so many different ways that chronic fatigue can manifest. But nonetheless, I had shared with him, some of my struggles that way, and those weren't really understood. And then when my marriage became really stressful and I started developing symptoms, there was no way that I could share what was going on, because that really, it was not a safe space. So for me, that wasn't an option, but maybe for you, you already have some friends or family members that might understand. And if they don't, we'll talk about the other topic here, which is being misunderstood, because that's very, very common. It's unfortunate that these two topics kind of go together. Feeling lonely or isolated and being misunderstood, sometimes they can kind of feed one another, unfortunately. Nonetheless, even though I know how difficult it can be to get the support that you need, it still is important to keep trying to get it. Now, of course, one of the ways, hopefully, that you can get some of it online is through chronic fatigue support and other wonderful pages and groups, whether it's on Facebook or other platforms. Any type of support is great. any type of support is better than not having it. But there is something to be said for more personal support. So any way that you can find that or start to cultivate it, even if it doesn't manifest, it's good to reach out and try and cultivate it. And I know that can be difficult to do when you're not feeling well. But I do encourage you to keep trying to find connections, even if they're new connections, right? Because sometimes when we get sick or we have difficult situations that come up in our lives, whether they're due to chronic symptoms or trauma or chronic illness or whatever your current particular circumstances are, sometimes the people in our lives that were there aren't going to be there anymore. And we have to find new people because maybe maybe their circumstances have changed, or maybe obviously our circumstances have changed. And so we need to find new people. But something else that's really important that I've also really learned is really being there for yourself too. And one way you can do this is really being kind to yourself and not being so hard on yourself. Practice self-compassion, practice kindness toward yourself, give yourself a break. I think a lot of people that are dealing with chronic symptoms or whether it's chronic health issues or just chronic life issues or challenges, trauma, whatever it is, in addition to that, we can be really hard on ourselves, and that just makes it that much harder. And that can kind of lend to that sense of isolation and misunderstanding, even kind of in our own little, private circle. So be really kind to yourself, give yourself infinite compassion, and give yourself a break. We all know that we're doing the best that we can. We're always searching for answers. And again, I did write a book that took me 10 years to write on all of these subjects. If you have chronic fatigue for any reason, I encourage you to check out my book, The Memory of Health. It goes into great, great detail about different theories of chronic fatigue and also a lot of tips and tricks that you can try and resources that may help you. I wrote it to hopefully help you see yourself in the story. And then briefly, let's talk about the other component, which is being misunderstood. Now, there's a lot I can say about this, and I wanted to go deeper into this. I'm at a ski resort right now, and someone is vacuuming, and I don't know if you can hear that, but I might keep it a little bit shorter right now because I don't know if that noise is kind of coming into this video. So I'll keep it shorter, but being misunderstood is no fun. It's very common, and it can also lead to more isolation, unfortunately. So I would say that the biggest thing I've learned this way is to not take those misunderstandings personally. Those are their opinions. And unless someone knows you really, really well and really takes the time to understand your circumstances, there's a very high chance they are going to misunderstand you. People get misunderstood all the time, even if they're not dealing with chronic health issues or chronic symptoms or trauma. But unfortunately, it can make it even worse if you are dealing with that. And then you kind of have that burden of being misunderstood stacked on top of that. So I would say my number one tip is to not take those judgments personally, because they're not personal. They might feel personal, but they're not personal. Those judgments are a reflection of the other person and not you. So do everything you can to not take on other people's bad energy, their judgments, misunderstandings. Let that be their karma. Let that be their misunderstandings to deal with, and don't take that burden on because you have enough already that you're carrying. There's a lot more I can say about that. And my plan is to do more videos. I will do some live videos too, but today I just felt like kind of doing a pre-recorded video and sharing it. And I hope some of this helps you. I really am here on your side, and we have a really amazing community here in chronic fatigue support. There is a private group too. If you need private or even anonymous support, we have a private Facebook group, and I believe the actual name of the group is Chronic Fatigue Help, but I'll list it again soon on our page here. So we are a source of support. You can be a source of support for yourself. Do everything you can to find support, even though I know it can be difficult to do when you're not feeling well, but keep seeking support, even if it is from new people. And also don't take on the judgment from other people. That's not your burden to carry. It's do everything you can just to be kind to yourself, compassionate to yourself, and take really good care of yourself. I'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.